Hello, Michael Toy YouTube channel. Today we're joined by our senior fellow, Dr. Stephen McCabe. So, Steve, more than 50 Tory MPs have written to the Prime Minister calling for a clear roadmap out of lockdown restrictions in Northern England, warning that the region risks being left behind. They also called for an economic recovery plan for the region, arguing it had been the hardest hit by the virus, but Number 10 said it was committed to levelling up across the country. So all the areas currently under the strictest restrictions of the government's three-tier system for England are currently in the North and in the Midlands. So are the government supporting the North here, and are they at risk of being left behind?
Right. Well, there's a great difficulty here. I mean, I can clearly understand why these MPs, who, strange enough, call themselves the Northern Research Group, I suppose, in a sort of faux homage to the European Research Group, who've been so effective in terms of Brexit, looking after their own particular interests. What we've got here, of course, is a very clear north-south divide. What's interesting, if you remember, way back in March, is the virus was spreading from the south northwards, and of course, what is being said is that we had a national lockdown because, of course, it was in everyone's interest. Now, what we've got is the virus being much more prevalent up north, as it were. And this is because of a number of factors, including deprivation and inequality and, in effect, poverty. Quite precise as the basis as to why, maybe we had Brexit. That's another issue, as it were, way back. But of course, the last election fought just over a year ago. Sorry, it's just under a year ago, my mistake, on the basis of course, Brexit, but of course, levelling up. And what these MPs are rightfully saying is that, if we are subject to sustained restrictions on movement, with all the consequential damage that's going to do to business interests and, of course, employment, levelling up becomes even more favourable than it probably was this time last year when we were going into the election. So I can certainly understand their concern. The difficulty is that there are no easy fixes to this one. It's COVID, despite what we may have thought earlier on in the year, is going to be around with us for quite some time.
So a former Northern Powerhouse Minister, Jake Berry, has urged Downing Street to provide people with clear data showing a route out of restrictions. He said that information published should be in an easily digestible, consumer-facing, public-friendly way. So are the government being clear enough about restrictions and lockdowns, or do you think there is more clarity needed?
Well, I mean, one of the great difficulties of this is that people don't really know what it is that they're supposed to do. And I know that might sound a little bit throwaway, but tiers are supposed to make life easier insofar as people fully understood what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it, and then adhere to it. I mean, clearly, even in national lockdown, which of course was the fact that we all abided by the same thing: go home and wait for this thing to pass by, which we were led to believe at that time would take weeks. The problem with what we've got with the tier system is that the criteria for getting into it is kind of a bit slippery, because of course some areas that you'd have thought should have gone into tier 3 have not. This is the rates of infection and of course the consequential deaths which are going up. But the real difficulty I do also accept is that if people are not particularly clear about how they got into it, they're not at all clear how we get out of it. And of course, what we get into is this thing that goes on forever and ever. Okay, it won't go on forever, but nonetheless, it's the fact, will this last a couple of weeks, a couple of months? Could we still be in these tier systems in 6 months, for instance? God help us if we're still here in another 12 months. And that's part of the difficulty. And I don't think the government fully know what to do. And of course, what we do also know with the tier system, it was an attempt, if you like, to avoid national lockdown. And we all understand that there are economic consequences to another national lockdown. But at the very same time, we have to accept that many other countries, including some of those that form part of the UK, are in effect in national lockdown, and we are not. So we're in this kind of halfway house. And I'll be honest with you, that those people I speak to, they're not quite sure what it is they're supposed to do. And of course, the other thing is that moving from one area to another, that there's all sorts of uncertainties. I think the real difficulty is that when we get to Christmas, which is not many weeks away, trying to keep people under lock and key, in effect, is going to be nigh on impossible. So yeah, I mean, I do accept greater clarity is needed. I think people are sort of suffering a sort of sense of both fatigue, which is understandable, and absolute uncertainty, because of course it's not been spelt out with the clarity that's needed. And this is always the difficulty. Once you sort of complicate your messages, then people sort of they lose interest very quickly.
So the tourism industry in Wales needs urgent clarity on rules after the national COVID firebreak lockdown ends, so some of its leaders, with emotions in the sector turning from anxiety to anger in some parts of the country. Across Wales, the industry was worth an estimated 6.3 billion in 2018 and also employs more than 132,000 people. That's nearly 1 in 10 of the Welsh workforce. So do you think the industry is being given enough support in Wales?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is probably not. I guess the sort of hospitality, which of course you might sort of say is encompasses tourism across the whole of the UK, has suffered really badly. Anything that stops people sort of doing the things that they would normally do, which is going and visiting places, is bound to have an impact. So, I mean, the simple answer is yes, of course, it could do with more money. But of course, dare I say it, that all of the sort of the hospitality industry is suffering in various ways, but I suppose in general in a sort of a pretty dramatic way. And of course, the difficulty is that eventually there will be a recovery, but of course the sort of the damage that's done in the process leaves its scars. So yeah, I mean, the fact is that at the moment we're talking about sort of, you know, if you wanted to go for a day and we're in half term, and you live on the border of Wales, you're not allowed to enter that country. You know, this is kind of unprecedented. It's bound to be having an impact. You know, okay, maybe at the moment it's not quite as bad because of course we're sort of into sort of the autumn and you know, winter just around the corner. But if these restrictions were still sort of lingering around in next spring, then of course it's going to cause untold sort of damage. And of course the other thing is that I'm seeing adverts on the TV exhorting us to sort of go and sort of see the country, but you know, you can only see the bits that sort of they're in your tier. Undoubtedly, you know, there are bound to be sort of problems for those people who are sort of employed in this, and of course the sort of the financial support that's been given, depending upon where you are, may not be enough to sort of to live on anyway. So huge problems.
Thanks for joining us, Steve.